Hi, so my name's Scarlett Long, and I'm going to be talking about the Harlem Renaissance. So first, what was the Harlem Renaissance? So it was a time period, roughly from the 1910s to the mid 1930s. It was also a location, so it was a neighborhood called Harlem, located in New York City, and this neighborhood was originally supposed to be a all-white neighborhood, but because of overdevelopment, landlords were left scrambling to find people to buy houses there. And so African Americans started moving there, and more moved there. So it just became, a neighborhood primarily with African Americans. It was also a migration, so migration from south to north to escape the racism and the lynchings and all the terrible things happening in the South. It was also an artistic and social boom, so poetry, literature, art, stage performance, music, and other forms of art were all booming for African Americans during this time. And it was a new worldwide recognition of African American art, unlike anything we had ever seen before. So people were actually starting to acknowledge and, enjoy more than just a few writers or artists. And it began ending in 1929 when the stock market crashed and later led to the Great Depression. So what was it originally called? It was originally called the New Negro Movement, and this was because of the New Negro, which was an anthology edited by Alan Locke. And in his words, the New Negro meant implying a more outspoken advocacy of dignity and refusal to submit quietly to the practices and laws of Jim Crow racial segregation. So to him, it was just standing up for what was wrong and what was going on in the nation. What led up to it? So the Civil War from 1861 to 1865 was kind of the beginning of all of this happening, and that was just the race war between the North and the South. And after the Civil War, the Reconstruction era, which was from 1863 to 1877. And then the Great Migration, which I talked about earlier, but it was when African Americans started moving from the South to the North to escape racism. And also because of World War I, a lot of white people were getting drafted, and so there were new job opportunities in the North, so that's also why people migrated to the North. And then World War I wasn't really leading up to it, was kind of during it, but there were 350,000 African Americans serving in World War I. And World War I kind of taught us about mass transportation and media, which helped move this Renaissance along. And it gave African Americans a more worldly view, so a better understanding of what was going on, not only in our nation, but around the world. And then also the Russian Revolution was important because it demonstrated that major change was possible. So some major themes that I have come up with just to go along with the Renaissance: confidence, creativity, acknowledgement, belonging, emotion, African American heritage, voice, new, and freedom. So I'll go through and kind of say, why I thought those. So confidence, because I think this was, the first time that more than just a few writers or poets could be confident in their works of art and could produce them and be successful. Creativity, obviously, because this is, revolved around arts. So it was really showing the creativity of African Americans. Acknowledgement, because it was the first time that African Americans were being acknowledged for their viewpoints on what was going on in the world. I mean, not the first time, but it was more common during this Renaissance than it was before. Belonging, because, they were all going through this together, and that was something that they could kind of bond with and belong to this Renaissance, and that they were, finally getting a voice. Emotion, because they were putting emotion behind their art. They were being vulnerable. They were, speaking their truth. African American heritage, because, this whole Renaissance was kind of based around what was going on with African Americans in the nation during that time, and just them kind of speaking their truths. Voice, because they finally had, a platform to show their work and to publish their novels and their art and whatnot. New, just because we had never really seen anything like this before. We had never seen such a boom in the culture with African Americans and the art they're producing. And freedom, because it gave them a platform to kind of control how, this narrative of being an African American in the United States, what it was like, and just allowed them to really tell us and show us what that consisted of. Some major organizations were the NAACP, or National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, and important works in this were The Crisis, which was edited by W.E.B. Du Bois, and this organization and this work was, it specifically called for a cultural renaissance. The National Urban League, and this consisted of the work Opportunity, which was edited by Charles S. Johnson, UNIA, or Universal Negro Improvement Association, and this consisted of The Negro World, which was edited by Marcus Garvey, Hubert Harrison, Eric Walrond, Williams Ferris, and others. And then newspapers and magazines also played a huge role in, supporting and moving this Renaissance along. And some examples of these were the Chicago Defender, the Pittsburgh Courier, the New York Amsterdam News, and the Norfolk Journal and Guide. And there were some other periodicals that were important to this time too, and that was the Crusader, Messenger, and the Emancipator. So there were also a lot of poetry and fiction breakthroughs along with other works of art, but I just thought these ones were specifically very important. Some of the poetry examples are Harlem Shadows, which was by Claude McKay, and Cain, which was by Jean Toomer. And some fiction breakthroughs were The Autobiography of an Ex-Colored Man by James Weldon Johnson, which we already talked about, and God's Trombones, which was also by James Weldon Johnson. So beyond Harlem, this Renaissance, and it wasn't just in Harlem, but African Americans also settled in other northern cities, so Chicago, Philadelphia, Cleveland. And also, I don't want to say that, this Renaissance was just boom, everyone loved African Americans and loved their works, and that just isn't the truth. The South was still horribly racist, along with some people in the North. And a lot of African Americans living in the South and other parts of the nation didn't know the Renaissance was going on until after. So some important people that made efforts beyond Harlem were Marcus Garvey, and he made efforts to establish UNIA in the Caribbean and Africa. And Zora Neale Hurston did some anthropological fieldwork in Jamaica and Haiti. James Weldon Johnson built ties between the NAACP and Haitian leaders. Langston Hughes, County Cullen, Claude McKay, Jesse Fawcett, and Alan Locke all made connections with Black French writers and would just kind of communicate their works with each other and just, talk about what was going on and whatnot. But some important Caribbean writers were McKay and Eric Walrond, and they were crucial to this movement, even though they weren't, located in Harlem. They still were very important. So basically, the reason for this slide is just to show that there was work being done globally. It wasn't just in Harlem. There are people working around the world and around the nation to, better the lives of African Americans. So why is this important? For one, it shaped how the Black experience was represented. So for the first time, African Americans could really, control how their experience was represented, and they could really tell their story. And we could hear it from their perspective, not from, the white perspective. Shared human experience, like I said, they were all going through this together, and they were all trying to better their lives and trying to get their works out there and supporting each other. I mean, obviously not all of them supported each other's viewpoints, but they had this shared human experience that kind of brought them together. cultural and social voice. For the first time, African Americans could speak about what was going on in the world and publish that. And they could also talk about what was socially going on with their culture and with how that was interacting with white culture, what that African American experience was like. And also, it helps us to understand the struggle. So even today, because of the Harlem Renaissance, we can look back and really see, what that was like during that time and what was going on, and just to understand the struggles that they had to go through and the racism that was going on. So, yeah. And then there's my works cited. So, thank you.